Good morning. Thanks for joining us. You know, 2018 has special meaning for all of us here at WBZ. We're marking 70 years of reporting on this community. And in the weeks leading up to the 70th anniversary of our first broadcast, we're airing a series of special reports looking back at what's changed here over the years in politics, education, transportation, and so on. If you missed my look back at 70 years of local politics this past Friday night, please go to cbsboston.com and check it out. This morning, we're following up on that report with a look at the future challenges that remain despite all the progress we've made. And here to help us do that are two veteran observers of local politics and policy, former House Speaker Tom Finneran. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you, John.
And Darnell Williams, president of the Urban League of Eastern Massachusetts. Darnell, welcome to you.
Thank you. Good morning.
Thanks for joining me. So, we were talking before we started rolling here, and we agree we've come a long, long way. But we have a long ways to go. And let me start with you, Darnell. When you think of the unaccomplished public policy missions in our city, in our state, what comes to the top of mind?
I think the biggest issue that we need to deal with, wrestle with, and come to terms with is the level of racism that still exists today within our city, within our state, and our nation. That we are at the table talking past one another. We provide judgment versus opportunities where we're really not getting to know the person or what they can add value to our end product. So if we can fix that issue in our lifetime, that will be a real significant accomplishment.
You agree with that, Tom?
Not entirely. I look ahead 70 years, almost. I would characterize that as just short of 3 generations. Yeah. 3 more generations. Well, let's look back the 3 generations to 1948, okay? Terribly racist city at the time. Very segregated, segregated not just black-white, segregated. The Irish were here, the Italians were here, here was a Polish section, here was another Greek section over here. Much, much more integration racially and by ethnic and cultural differences. All of that, I think, is remarkable what has happened, yet Darnell makes a very good point. You have income inequality, you have educational disparities that are still very, very troubling. I think the challenge will be in each of those areas. Economic opportunity, legitimate economic opportunity for more people, and trying to find a way to close and effectively erase that educational outcome disparity.
As far as I know, I'm sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you.
I just want to say, I think this is why this is so important when we have this discussion. When I look at folks who live in Mattapan who've never been to the North End, or folks who live in the North End, never been to Roxbury or Dorchester, you have to go out of your way to end up in Brighton or Alston. So we live in these pockets and these economics. So I have poverty over here and I have abject wealth over here. So when I say that racism and how that plays itself out in our everyday life, we have that enormous challenge that should not be negated because of the progress that we've made. But that is also a reality that we have to live with.
Well, this is what I wanted to get at. As far as I know, public policymakers can't reach inside people and change their hearts.
That's right.
Bigotry obviously still exists here, elsewhere. Let's talk about what is doable by public policymakers. Tom, you mentioned a couple of things: income inequality, segregated housing. You were starting to head down that road. How will we know, looking forward a decade or more, that we are trying to address or starting to address racism? By what public policy measure will we know that we're on the right track?
We have to think, first I think we have to think about what really keeps people segregated. It's the cost of housing. Cost of housing is going up. The person who makes up your bed, fixes your meal, opens up your door will not be able to live in this city if those numbers keep going up. So economic opportunity means how do we make sure that their pay and their ability to live in this city does not get eliminated. So I think the public policy means housing and affordability, the irrational exuberance that goes on within the city. I think that those are the kind of things that from a public policy standpoint of view, we can make a difference on.
Tom, over the years, we've tried linkage to make developers pay into community funds. We've tried incentives for affordable housing. Is it working?
I think it is working. I guess I'd make 2 points. First of all, with regard to the racism of today as compared to 1948, and then we're trying to peer over the horizon 50, 70 years down the road. Let's keep in mind the racism in 1948 was open, it was notorious, and nobody really kind of, tut, say, hey, that's wrong, that's inappropriate.
There was no pressure.
Today, there is enormous scorn and contempt, and people like that are ostracized. Now, it might have gone underground, underwater, invisible in some ways, in some areas, but it is noticeably less. Second, on the housing, and to Darnell's point, look at what, and I'll just use the incumbent mayor, Mayor Walsh, is doing. He's answering it in an intelligent economic fashion. You have to increase the supply. There is high demand for housing in Boston. If some wealthy couple in the suburbs want to sell their house in Wellesley Hills and become, more urban in their lifestyle and in their later years, well, they're always going to displace the Finnerans and the Williams. They're all because they have the do-re-mi to do it. What do you have to do? You have to increase the supply. In some areas, the mayor has run into resistance on that, and it's really people just don't see the notion or the complementarity of supply and demand. We need more housing, and we need it everywhere. Mattapan as well as downtown, Brighton as well as Roxbury. You need it all across the board, so that you can meet the
affordable
demand.
Housing.
But it becomes affordable, Darnell, if as that supply increases. Guess what? If you and I are competing landlords and you just brought 10 more units on, you want to have your units filled. Guess what you're going to do? You're going to price it below where I priced mine, because when that supply was tight, I was able to jack up the rent. Now the supply has expanded. I have to be cognizant of that.
I got a break, but final word from you before we move on to another.
Another topic, just the same topic in terms of housing. I think at the end of the day, I want the quality of life for people to be solid. I don't want folks who are working their way up the food chain to have to work 2 to 3 jobs in order to afford to live here in Boston. Those are the real gut-wrenching issues that I think that everyday people are dealing with.
So, okay, we were talking about racism, about housing patterns, about making sure that people share in the prosperity more widely. But we also touched briefly on how expensive it is to live here, and this is driving people away. Between 2010 and 2017, our state had a net domestic migration of nearly 100,000. Not as bad as some others, but still not good. To stop that exodus, how can we continue to accept or fail to correct highest in the nation healthcare costs, soaring energy costs, among the highest in the nation, and, based on what might happen at the polls this November, a growing tax base, or tax rate, I should say? Darnell, why don't you start? Well,
I think that when we think about where we are and where we're trying to go over the next 70 years, all of the cost of living in Boston is really, it's challenging. The cost of your basket of goods in order to make life work. And that means that if you start to think about the baby boomers who are getting ready to retire and the millennials, there are 2 different groups that are wrestling with that number or with that reality. I think that people have to do is they need to cut back on their expenses. They have to make sure that they own versus rent. And so at the end of the day, when they hang up the boxing gloves, that they're not paying money out of their disposable income in order to maintain their lifestyle.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, but weren't you at one point chairman of the Committee on Banking in the legislature? Yes, so are they part of the problem or part of the solution?
I think they're part of the solution. Most of the banks today that are active in the communities that Darnell and I engage with on a daily basis, where we live, where we play, where our children live and our grandchildren live and play. The banks, the community banks, are very, very much involved in that. To your specific question of Darnell a moment ago, I think the education is crucial, whether it's going to be in the form of charter schools or whatever form it might take. Very, very hard to envision it. Here's another complication that we have to anticipate. What happens with robotic engineering and robots and artificial intelligence, where so many jobs, it looks as if, as you peer over that horizon, it looks like so many jobs where people had that middle-class lifestyle and career that Darnell mentioned, so many of those jobs seem to be about to be wiped out. How do we as a society, navigate that? Are we going to have guaranteed minimum incomes? How does somebody fill their day in a productive, purposeful way if the job on the shop floor has been wiped out?
And that's the challenge we have, John. I think that the key is that robots don't buy products. Robots may do the work that people used to do. Where you graduate from high school, and I do a job with my hands. Those jobs are so if they are replaced by robotic engineering, but they don't buy the products. They don't buy the cars. They don't buy the glasses or the tires. So we have a real challenge that the bottom line or the profit margin is not necessarily the sole driver, but we have to have people engagement throughout the whole process where we stay gainfully engaged.
In the piece I prepared, looking back at the last 70 years, you know, we obviously touched on, you know, Kevin White,
Yes.
Mayor of Boston, the late Kevin White, was known, and not always in a positive way, as sort of mayor of downtown. This was the era when Faneuil Hall was revived, and there was a lot of emphasis on reviving downtown Boston, and some people felt to the detriment of the neighborhoods. Then you had Ray Flynn and Tom Menino, who were very neighborhood-focused.
Urban mechanics.
Right, and had a vision of the city that really was, to the minds of many, more balanced in that way. I'm bringing this up because now we're awaiting word as to whether or not Amazon is going to come in here, bringing 50,000 jobs, average salary in the low six figures. And yet there's concern about the practice of giving out big tax breaks to companies like this to get them to come in, what that influx of well-paid people might do to traffic congestion, to the already soaring housing market. Let's start with you on this one, Tom. Is it a good idea for us to be chasing Amazon when you think about addressing these issues for the future?
Yes, it is, because the opposite is the Amazons or the Bank of Bostons or the other big employers are leaving town to go somewhere else. So I don't want to get into a bidding war against another desperate city who will open up the coffers or the vaults of that particular city. And if you look closely at what Governor Baker, Mayor Walsh, and others are doing, and we can go all the way back to Mayor Kevin White, as you mentioned, a lot of what are deemed tax breaks are promises to keep the tax that will be paid fairly steady for the first 10 or 15 years. Now, so it's not as if they get a zero tax bill. They're still getting a tax bill. It's just not the huge multiplier that would be because they put up a big $100 million office tower. That's number one. Two, more specifically, a lot of this public benefit is in the form of infrastructure that benefits all of us. So you look at what Amazon, with their 2,000 new jobs coming into the seaport, that's going to be infrastructure on the Silver Line, sidewalks, pedestrian lanes, bike lanes, all those things. All three, we can meet down there and utilize what some people deem, oh, that was the Amazon giveaway. It's not an Amazon giveaway. It's for all of us.
Are you as bullish on that as
Oh,
Tom?
absolutely, 150%. I believe that what we're talking about is how do we improve the city. And if the residents of the city of Boston become part of that 50,000 new workers, then what's wrong with that? There's no downside. I call that, wise investment of our infrastructure dollars, as Tom has stated, that we will improve the overall climate. Jobs will be here. And I think that why not Boston? Boston is centrally located. There are 81 colleges and universities, top healthcare facilities in the nation. And if we're talking about retaining the talent that we train here in those colleges, what better way to do that by having employers that can bring them on board?
You think of MIT, you think of Harvard, you think of all the other colleges and universities that Darnell made reference to. You think of how small the world has become, John. You know, back in 1948, those two oceans were massive things. I mean, it was really a detriment. Europe is practically a next-door neighbor. Asia, we can go over to Logan Airport in 20 minutes and get on a non-stop flight to China. It's astounding. This is all good stuff. And Darnell's right. We should be taking advantage, as it seems we are, of that MIT, that Harvard, the Brandeis, the Tufts, the great colleges and universities to educate the world. A lot of them love what they see when they come here. They want to stay and be a part of what's going on.
Let's wrap this up with an admonition to the leaders of the future, the present and the future. I mean, leadership comes in with all different kinds of attitudes. If you're Scott Pruitt, the EPA head, you look at your time in Washington as an opportunity to tour the world on the taxpayer's dime and furnish your office real nicely. If you're a Tom Menino or a Tom Finneran, you see it as not an opportunity to come out on the other end filthy rich, but to actually help people and bring people together. Looking forward, Darnell, to leaders now, the young leadership coming up, and the future generations, what would be your admonition to them to improve our community?
I think at the end of the day, you could be elected to the highest office in this land and have an approach. But what people are looking for is somebody who's going to unify us, that when we have a national tragedy, that rather than to divide us around this tragedy, you use your position in order to heal the land, to bring people together across racial, ethnic, and sexual orientation lines and say, I'm concerned about each and every one of you as Americans, and even if you're a visitor on our soil, I want to make sure that you feel safe and you feel welcome here. That's what this nation was built upon. That was the promise. People came here to these shores because they left someplace that had less, came here with an economic and educational opportunity that if I work hard, I play by the rules, I pay my taxes, then I can find the American dream right at my fingertips. That's what I want our leaders to always never lose sight of. And if we do that, then we can applaud ourselves that we think about not the person who has the most, but we focus in on the person who has the least and give them a chance in order to rise.
I'd call it civic and social cohesion. That's exactly what I'd call it. It's the ability to bring people together and see the commonality among and between all of us, whatever our faith, whatever our race, whatever our gender, whatever our sexual orientation. There should be a civic and social cohesion where we are still all Americans.
And 70 years ago, we called that the melting pot.
That's right.
Are we still that? Are we still heading toward that dream?
I think that we are a goulash with a few other elements inside of it, but it's still workable.
I happen to think we are heading along that line to that dream, really on a rapid basis. You think of 3 more generations of interaction and engagement, intermarriage. I mean, once upon a time, black and white couple, like, whoa, what's going on? Right. Now today, you say, hey, gee, isn't that nice? Isn't that nice? Blah, blah, blah. And we see it in our own families. We see it in our neighbors. We see it in our friends. It's a huge step forward from 1948, John.
A lot of work left to do.
Indeed.
This conversation left me hopeful. I hope it does to our viewers as well. Thank you, Darnell Williams,
Thank you.
Tom Finneran.
Thank you, John.
Appreciate it.